Our next speaker is Dr. Rob Oulton, who is a member of Extinction Rebellion and also a Unitarian from our Godalming congregation. Rob has been involved in actions both locally and in London, and he's been arrested on 2 occasions and will tell us about his experiences and reasons for getting involved. Thank you, Rob. It's all yours.
Okay, hello everybody. I know quite a lot of you. Nice to see you all. Yeah, I think I've been invited because of my experience in the direct actions last October and just recently in September. And so Mark has already introduced us very succinctly to the principles of nonviolent direct action, why Extinction Rebellion have adopted it as a tactic. As he says, basically the actions of us as individuals really are having no effect, and there has to be some mass pressure on the people in power to begin to affect a change sufficient to make a difference to the catastrophic situation of global warming. And as he said in his piece, this willingness to be a nuisance, risk arrest, put some grit in the machine with a non-violent civil disobedience is established in the history of the last couple of 100 years. It goes back further beyond that, really, particularly in the US and in India. But in my lifetime, we've seen it in CND, the Green and Women. You may remember Reclaim the Streets, and then the Occupy movement about 10 years ago. And essentially these movements are connected. And what we're seeing now in Extinction Rebellion is these strands around all sorts of issues about civil justice, the use of natural resources, equity, democracy, all coming together in Extinction Rebellion. You can trace all these different strands. They're like tributaries coming together in a big river. And that also includes issues around racial justice, differences between the prosperous North and the South. So all those things are coming into this one river. And if you get into Extinction Rebellion, you'll find these different aspects coming up. It will trigger all sorts of resonances with people who've been interested in what should we say, in radical things over the last 30, 40, 50 years. I see civil disobedience as a way of adding kind of weight, gravity to a process, because when you add weight, gravity to a process, you get traction, you get momentum, and you get resilience. And that's really useful in a campaign. One of the demonstrations I remember going on, some of you may have gone on this, is the big, huge march before the war in Iraq in 2003. I think it was the biggest demonstration ever in the UK. There was over 1 million people or something huge like that. And I don't need to remind you how that all worked out. No one listened, and they don't listen to demonstrations. There's been countless demonstrations on Brexit, the NHS, all sorts of things over the last few years. The streets are cleared, the people come, the crowd shout, everyone goes home at the end of the day and nothing changes. So that's why Extinction Rebellion have adopted these tactics. Sometimes I see it as attention seeking, but when I was in my days as a doctor, I learned to discern attention seeking. There's usually a reason why attention was needed, and it usually meant, quite often, there was a history in the past for that person of neglect or abuse. And I think neglect and abuse, at least, are partly demonstrated by what Mark has told us. This is what we're doing to the earth, and by implication, our civilization. Neglect and abuse. And to a certain extent, XR is that family member who won't be silenced any longer and starts shouting out the truth. And everyone gets rather embarrassed, particularly when XR people are acting out, you might say. That dread, oh, he's just acting out, that awful statement. But of course, for a lot of people, it's a huge relief when someone starts shouting. It's finally out in the open. And I think that's one of the reasons why XR has had such success, particularly in 2019. It's just an enormous relief. Suddenly, the truth is out there. Someone's shouting and refusing to be silenced or browbeaten. But it's also, of course, it's difficult to do this. We're British after all, and it's painful and it's embarrassing. So Daddy shouts and gets angry, and Mummy says, "Oh, just hush, dear, don't rock the boat." And Granny says, "Oh, that stupid child, she couldn't speak like that in my day." And all sorts of jibes come from the public sphere about people in XR being woke or politically correct, or it's just not common sense. Or they're just wasting police time, or just middle-class people posturing or virtue signalling, or just nice young people sowing their revolutionary oats with a lot of silly old fools like me tagging along behind, trying to relive their younger days. And then, of course, the more sinister threats. And you heard this very much in September. XR is a criminal gang. And all the subtle gestures to make you feel afraid. And I can testify to that. It's very, very real. Now, I've been influenced by a lot of radical voices in my lifetime, although I'm a very timid soul. But I dare say one of the two voices that influenced my decision to participate in non-violent civil disobedience with XR are Jesus and Henry Thoreau, who's the 19th century American writer, famous for his book Walden, about his 2 years living in a little hut by Walden Pond. Now, in the gospel narratives, we see many wonderful things about how the kingdom of heaven can restore proper loving relationships within society and what humans can be when our hearts are open to God. But they also show us the potential cost of following this path. It can lead to all sorts of confrontation. And there's no doubt that Jesus knew which way it would all go, but he made his choice in those 40 days when he sat down with the devil of doubt and fear, which we remember in the season of Lent before Easter. Now, doubt and fear, I can truthfully say that was me when I sat down in the middle of Whitehall last October on a Monday morning, and later that week tried to stop myself shaking, literally, with fear, I guess, as a line of police moved towards us, arresting all who refused to move. Now, it was the last thing I really wanted to be doing, but sometimes you do have to make a choice. And my habitual life tactics of evasion and procrastination just don't cut it anymore. When I think about fear, and I thought a lot about fear, and I think it's a thing that's worth thinking about in this context, I always think about Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Some of you may have heard of, who was a German theologian who was executed in, I think, 1944 and 1945 for defying the Nazis. And I often think about him and the Holocaust in general, and I ask myself the question, which probably a lot of you have also done: what would I have done? What choices would I have made? And what's the limit of my passivity in the face of wrongdoing, civilly instituted wrongdoing, you might say? Or has my passivity, in fact, no limits? And this is the interesting question which Thoreau asks in his essay, Civil Disobedience. And he was actually a Unitarian, which is one of the reasons for mentioning him. I'm not sure he was always a Unitarian, but he started out as one. And he invented the term, and his essay of that name actually influenced Tolstoy, who influenced Gandhi, and of course, who influenced the American civil rights movement. So Thoreau was quite important in this. his act of civil disobedience was to refuse to pay the poll tax. And this was way back in the first part of the 19th century, because it funded the federal government, which before the Civil War upheld the slavery laws. And he was a very strong abolitionist. And he also objected to the US making war with Mexico. Now, his act of civil disobedience led into the night in Lord Jeff, only in there one night. That was his, so he was lucky in that. But anyway, in his essay, Thoreau reached this conclusion that however democratic a mandate the government might have, it cannot overrule individual conscience. And this is what he asks: can there not be a government in which majorities do not virtually decide right and wrong, but conscience? In which majority is...
Rob, you're breaking up.
The citizen, ever for a moment or in the least degree, has been conscience then. I think we should be men first, say men and women first, of course. So Thoreau is saying that democratic majorities may grant authority to a government, but they cannot overrule basic principles of right and wrong. If they're doing that, the concerned citizen must think about acting, however inconvenient that might be. Now, if you read the Gospels all the way through, you pick up something that's not so obvious from a single passage, and that's a sense of urgency. Story after story presents binaries: wily or scared stewards, wheat or weeds, sheep or goats, wise or foolish maidens. The list is endless. These binaries and the either or choices they imply emphasize Jesus' intuition that time is short. The rich man's life will be taken this night. His barns stuffed full won't save him. The rich young ruler must sell his property and follow Jesus to gain eternal life. So aren't our barns stuffed full? Aren't our indulgent lifestyle so hard to give up? Hasn't the choice finally arrived on our doorsteps? And we have to admit it, we don't like it. Now, I don't know if any of you are Lord of the Rings fans. It's my alternative Bible, and it's got a lot of lessons about courage, about friendship, about impossible odds, solidarity. And I thought about it a lot during the XR actions, particularly last October. Now, early in the story, for those of you who know it and those of you who don't, Gandalf the wizard explains to the hobbit Frodo the terrible predicament they are in. And Frodo says, I wish it need not have happened in my time. So do I, said Gandalf, and so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. So it's now, it seems, our turn to decide what to do with the time given to us. And that time may not be as long as we previously thought, as Mark's presentation so clearly showed. As Thoreau asks, will I be a human person first and a subject after, or vice versa? As weak and fearful a man as I am, as I undoubtedly am, I do still have, unlike many parts of the world, the precious gift of liberty to make this choice. Only between maybe 1.5 to 3.5% of the population need to rebel to reach a critical mass that forces a government to act. So shall I walk away like the rich young ruler, full of fear and sadness, or shall I choose what is right and be a human first rather than forever an obedient subject? So last October, I made that choice, or tried to begin to make that choice, and my battered copy of Thoreau's writings, having formed part of my pillow for my rather uncomfortable night on Whitehall, gave me courage as I sat in that Lewisham prison. And I'm going to finish now with a quote from Rachel Carson, and when she drew attention to the environmental degradation, first by unbridled industry in her book Silent Spring. And she wrote these words about the same choice the human race faces. And this is what she said: "We now stand where two roads diverge, but unlike the road in Robert Frost's famous poem, they are not equally fair. The road we have long been travelling is deceptively easy, a smooth superhighway on which we progress with great speed, but at the end lies disaster. The other fork in the road, the one less travelled by, offers our last, our only chance to reach a destination that ensures the preservation of the earth." And that's why I've chosen to join and be part of the XR movement. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. That's brilliant. That was a fantastic presentation. Thank you so much.